I'd like to welcome you all. I hear a little bit of feedback. I'd like to welcome you all to the 44th Annual Northwood University Freedom Seminar. This is the first event of what will be 3.5 days of a deep dive into issues related to a free economy and entrepreneurship and all the values that we at Northwood University hold dear. And we are glad you're here. Whether you're a student taking this for college credit, or whether you are an alumnus and you want to get additional education, or whether you're new to Northwood University and visiting for the first time, welcome. And we hope that this is a great experience for you. Before I begin tonight's presentation, I just want to take a moment to thank all the people that made this weekend happen. And in particular, I want to thank my colleague Alex Tokoroff, who helped plan the event with me. I want to thank Carla Spaeth, Dan Goodall, who's running the technology here tonight, Wesley Hoyle, who produced our website, Kate Hessling, our communications expert. And I also want to thank the McNair Center for sponsoring this event. We are in the McNair Center right now, and the McNair Center for Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship is an important part of the university that produces a lot of economic studies related to the free enterprise economy, and you'll find some of them on the tables outside for you to take home with you tonight. Okay, so with those preliminary remarks, in order to open the 44th Annual Freedom Seminar, I would like to invite to the podium our distinguished president, Dr. Kent McDonald.
Good evening, everyone online and those in the room here. On behalf of Dr. Jennifer Panning, let me just extend a warm welcome to all of you. Particularly pleased to see student participation. My faculty and staff colleagues are here. A couple weeks ago, we had Arthur Brooks on campus, and we had over 800 people join us for that. So the fact that we continue to reach out and have members of our community here, I welcome you back on campus, all of you. And in particular, I do want to welcome Stephen Moore to our campus, Jonathan Williams, an alumnus, Jonathan Williams. Both of these gentlemen will be introduced more fully by Dr. Matchuk shortly. Over dinner this evening, we had a rich conversation about a number of things. Two things kind of stuck in my mind. What is it that makes young people happy today? Was one. Another one was this clear shift to the left of most universities in North America. Many deny it, but it's happening. And that actually, those two kind of things brought us back as a community a year and a half ago when we launched the President's Task Force on the review and the renewal of the Northwood idea. These fundamental tenets here at Northwood that we deeply believe in: limited government, free enterprise, rule of law, the ability of people to wake up in the morning and kind of make a future for themselves. And out of that are many, many events, including this, the Freedom Seminar. Dale mentioned it's been happening for 44 years that we've been able to gather here on an annual basis to talk about these important matters. This particular year is exciting for us. There are three themes that have emerged, one around economics, one around the environment, and the one around society. And I just hope all of you return to all of those sessions over the next 3.5 days to learn, to expand, to challenge the way we think of the world. And with that, again, thank you for joining us. And all of our guests, welcome to our humble but important campus here in Midland, Michigan. And with that, Dr. Matchuk, I'll turn it back to you for the formal introductions. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Okay, well, we are privileged to have at the Freedom Seminar for the first time Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore is a distinguished economist and has a rather lengthy resume here, so I'll try to be brief. Currently, he is the senior economist at FreedomWorks, but prior to that, he was a senior economic advisor to the Trump administration and played a major role in the most significant tax legislation since the 1986 tax reform, and that was the tax legislation in 2017. And he is also, before that, worked as a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. He's the founder of the Club for Growth and served as its president for a number of years. He is a frequent guest on news programs and has appeared at Forbes, Fox News, published in the National Review, Washington Times. Very respected and well-known economist coming here to the Freedom Seminar for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Moore. I also want to welcome back to the Freedom Seminar Jonathan Williams. And as President McDonald mentioned, Jonathan Williams is no stranger to Northwood. He's an alumnus, and we're quite proud of the work he's done. He is a senior economist for the American Legislative Change Council. He is the author of the book that you saw on the table as you entered the room tonight, Rich States, Poor States, and he has been testifying before state legislatures for a number of years on how to improve their tax systems to make them more competitive and more pro-growth. He publishes frequently in the Wall Street Journal, including an article that appeared today. So get your copy of the Wall Street Journal and you can read his latest piece. And he's also written for the Financial Times, Investors Business Daily. He's a columnist at Tax Analysts. And he also serves on the advisory board of the State Financial Officers Foundation and is an adjunct fellow at the Kansas Policy Institute. Again, he has a lengthy resume here, and I'll keep my remarks brief so they have more time to enlighten us this evening. So the way it's going to work is I'm first going to call to the podium Stephen Moore, who will focus on the federal level and tax policy, pro-growth tax policy at the federal level, and then I'll invite, when he's finished, Jonathan will talk about state-level tax policy. So, Stephen, would you join me? Thank you.
Well, good evening, folks. It is a real pleasure and honor to be here. Mr. President, thank you so much for the kind invitation to come. I give a lot of lectures on college campuses over the years, and I've just met a lot of wonderful students here. So you're lucky to go to such a great school with such great faculty. And when I heard Jonathan kind of invited me to come, and I was kind of a little bit reluctant, because I've been traveling a lot. But then he said they have a 3-day program on economic freedom. No one else in the country does that. So this is fantastic. It is awesome because economic freedom is what it's all about. I've devoted my whole career to advancing economic freedom because the free enterprise system and economic freedom are the goose that lays the golden eggs. It's really that simple. That countries that are free and have free markets prosper, and countries that don't grow poor over time. And I've really devoted, my 35-year career to that. I've been very fortunate in my career in that I've been able to work for two of the two presidents I think of the last 50 years have been our two greatest presidents, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. And I'll talk a little bit about just what that was like working for those two presidents and helping on economic policy. But before I get into that, I wanted to by the way, just one kind of fun story that happened today. We flew into Detroit and I got picked up and we drove from the Detroit airport here. And when we got halfway, we stopped off at one of the little gas station marts. And I walked in and there was this lovely lady who was there and she saw me as I walked in and she got very excited and she was just, bubbling with, happiness, and she ran up to me and she threw her arms around me. She said, "I know you, don't I?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, ma'am. I don't know if I've met you before." And she said, it was very endearing. And she said, haven't I seen you on TV? And I said, well, maybe. I said, what do you watch? And then she kept looking up at me, and then a smile came on her face. The light bulb went on. She said, wait a minute. She said, didn't I see you on Wheel of Fortune last week? I said, yes, ma'am, that was me. But it's been, I also have a relationship with Fox News, and so do a lot of commentary with them as well. So first of all, I want to give you some advice, because I know I've talked to many of the students in this room, and I know many of your seniors and about to embark on your life in the real world. And I wanted to just suggest a few things. First of all, when you get up in the morning and you have your Starbucks coffee, just take 5 or 10 minutes and read the Wall Street Journal editorials. How many of you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page? Come on, I wish I saw everybody's hand come up. So it's well worth it if you want to know what's going on with the economy, with this, the politics, with world events and so on. There's no better place to just get a good summary that you can read those 3 editorials in 10 minutes. I worked 10 years writing those with the team. I'm not with the Journal anymore, so I'm not selling you anything. But it's just a great way to be the smartest person in the room. So do that. I think it'll pay off big time to read the Wall Street Journal editorial page every morning, 6 days a week. Number 2, do what you love. Do what you love. I've been so blessed in my life because I've been able to do the things that I want to do, and the things that I'm good at. And if you love what you're doing, you're going to be good at it. Now, that doesn't mean, you're going to be, I wanted to be a pro football quarterback. That doesn't mean, you're going to realize all your wildest dreams. But people make a mistake when they graduate from college in doing something that might, earn them the most amount of money, the highest paying job. I mean, let me give you an example. When I graduated from college, I had 2 job offers. One was to work for General Electric in their management training program. This was back in 1984. That was like one of the most prestigious programs any college graduate could get in. I mean, it was like people who got into that program, they were on their way, to becoming very successful in business and getting very rich. But then, my college professor said, hey, why don't you come in, with me and work in the Reagan administration? And by the way, the General Electric was offering $36,000 a year. And back then, $36,000 was like 1983. That was a lot of money. And, they said, well, why don't you come and work in the Reagan administration and we'll pay you $1,000 a month. And I thought about it. I said, my heart is in, going and working for Reagan, and it's not going on this other job. And it's the smartest decision I ever made. Although I might be really, really rich today if I'd taken that other job. But, if you're doing something you love, you're going to spend at least half of your life working. So do something that really is fulfilling to you. Number 3, how many of you in this room want to start a business? Raise your hand. That's pretty good. I've started 3 businesses over my career. 2 of them failed, and 1 of them was a success. That's, pretty much the batting average. About 2 out of 3 businesses fail. And there's no shame in failing, by the way. In fact, if I hadn't had my 2 failures in business, I don't think my 3rd business would have succeeded. So, starting your own business is scary. It's frightening. You're the last person who gets paid, right? You only get paid as the business owner if you have enough after you've paid all your other workers, but it is incredibly fulfilling. And you're doing an incredible service to your fellow man when you start a business, because you're actually employing people and bringing a paycheck to people that helps keep their, family with a roof over their head and so on. So, there is a lot to being an entrepreneur, and for those of you who want to go for it, because it's an amazing experience. So let me talk a little bit about what it is like to have worked for 2 presidents. I worked, as kind of a junior person in the in the Reagan administration. But, I'm really proud of that because I do think Reagan belongs on Mount Rushmore. I do think he was one of our greatest presidents for winning the Cold War and really rescuing the American economy from an economic apocalypse that we were facing from the 1970s. But I really got to know, the President Trump very well. And I know everyone in this room has very different opinions about Donald Trump. People either love him or hate him. Sometimes there are things I love about Trump and there are things I hate about Trump. So he is, in many ways, Donald Trump is his own worst enemy. I used to say that the only person who could beat Donald Trump in 2020 was Donald Trump. And yet, he has some amazing characteristics. I remember, so many fun times. If you ever get a chance to work on a presidential campaign, by the way, they are a lot of fun, and especially when you win, they're very fun to work on. And you really get to see America, by the way. You're traveling to Arkansas, then you're going to, Missouri, and then you're going to California, and then you're going to Maine, and you just see this great country, and every state is very different culturally and politically, intellectually. And it was a lot of fun, traveling. I traveled with Trump on his plane. I'll never forget, one of my favorite stories about traveling with Trump was that, the first time I went on his plane, I thought this is going to be so great because he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire. So I was thinking, we're going to have like champagne and lobster and caviar. It's going to be awesome, And every time we traveled with him, the cuisine was always the same. It was McDonald's Big Macs for lunch and Pizza Hut for dinner. The man loves fast food. He's a real man of the people. But he was one thing about Trump that I think made him a successful president in many ways in terms of his handling of the economy was that he was a businessman. And I think that's why he won the election against Hillary Clinton, was that people were tired of career politicians. They wanted somebody who knew something about something other than politics, and somebody who wasn't just a lawyer or a career politician. And frankly, I think that is one of the reasons Trump was able to do as well as he did in terms of his handling of the economy, because he knew how to run things. And frankly, a lot of the professional politicians we have in Washington have never run any kind of institution, let alone a $6 trillion enterprise like the federal government. And so Trump was an energizer bunny. He is a freak of nature. I never met anyone quite like Trump in terms of the energy level that man had was incredible. We would travel, literally, he'd be going 16, 17 hours a day. I think he would operate on about 5 hours of sleep. A lot of times he'd call me up at 2 a.m. Steve, what are you doing? Sir, like most people, I'm sleeping. What are you doing? He would just go and go and go and go and go. And I don't know what it is about his personality that made him such an energizer bunny, but it was really incredible. And I think that was something I really came to admire about him. The other thing I'll say about Trump, and by the way, I'm not here to sell you on, everybody has their own opinion about the man one way or the other, but I just want to kind of tell you about, my impressions of Trump and how he handled these economic issues that had such a big impact. I do believe that even though I was in the Oval Office many times with President Trump, and, oftentimes, one of the things I liked about Trump, by the way, is you could argue with him. He liked to have arguments about things, and we'd duke it out, and, he'd say, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. He threw me out of the Oval Office a couple of times when he'd get mad at me. But, he liked to argue about things. And that's what a good CEO should do, by the way. You shouldn't be surrounded by yes men, right? You want people who can, no, you shouldn't do this. Here's why. And, when it came to tariffs, I'm a free trade guy. So he wanted all these new tariffs, and we'd always try to talk him out of it. And oftentimes, we were able to maybe to get him to bring the tariffs down a little bit. But the point is that I think he was a good executive in the sense that he did get everyone's opinion before he made his decision. And I do think this about Trump, that even though sometimes I disagreed with the opinions that he came out with, I always believed that he was making decisions that he believed were putting America first. And I'm an America first guy. That's not a racist thing to say. It's not, xenophobic. It's simply that's what a president should do. He is the president of the United States, not the president of the world. And every decision the president should make, in my opinion, should be about, will this help American workers? Will this help American companies? Will this make America more secure in the world? Will it keep us safe? And I think Trump was an honorable man because he did that. And frankly, with this administration, I'm not so sure that's the case all the time, that putting America first is not always the priority of this administration that we have now. And so we did some really important things that I think had a dramatic impact on the economy. And by the way, before COVID hit, I'll never forget, in January of 2020, I'll never forget kind of waking up in the middle of the night and saying, everything's too good right now. I mean, we had the best economy in 40 years. I mean, the economy was absolutely booming at the start of 2020. We had done our big tax cut, and we were sucking in capital from the rest of the world. We were just blowing away the competition. And, we had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years in the beginning of 2020. We had the lowest poverty rate in the history of the United States. Think about that. That means in Trump's third year in office, a smaller share of Americans were poor than at any other time in the history of the country. By the way, one of the things that people said about Trump that I thought was really an unfair, attack against him was they said he's a racist. Donald Trump is a racist. And I thought, well, wait a minute. First of all, I was around Trump a lot, and the man, just the way he treated people, I guarantee you he was not a racist. And the way he dealt with Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, that simply wasn't the Donald Trump I knew. But more importantly, the policies that we put in place, the biggest beneficiaries of these free enterprise policies of deregulating the economy, better trade deals, cutting the tax rates, promoting American energy. The biggest beneficiaries of those policies were minorities. So when Trump was president in 2020, we had the lowest Black unemployment rate ever recorded in the country. We had the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate ever recorded in the history of the country. Same thing with poverty rates, falling for Blacks and Hispanics more than any other group. And so those policies really paid off in spades in terms of really promoting. One of these criticisms is our free enterprise policies made the rich richer and the poor poorer. Somebody just the other day, I was on a Fox show, and my Democratic opponent was saying that, oh yeah, things were good, except the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Well, no, that's just factually untrue. In fact, the wage gains for people at the bottom and the middle class were actually higher than the wage gains that were made for people at the top. So it really was truly what John F. Kennedy talked about. What you want with a prosperous economy is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And we had that. We had that with respect to rising wages, lower poverty rates, lower unemployment rate, and in a surplus of jobs. And I remember waking up that night and thinking, something is going to happen. Things are too good. I didn't know if there was going to be an asteroid that was going to hit the planet, an earthquake, a terrorist attack or something, but I just had this premonition, because if things had remained as they were in January 2020, in November of 2020, Trump would have won the biggest landslide, re-election ever. And then something big happened. And that, of course, was COVID, something none of us would have expected. And COVID really did change everything overnight. And I think Trump gets, he didn't get everything right by any means with respect to COVID, but he did a lot of things right with respect to COVID. And one of the most important things that happened that I don't think that the president gets the credit he deserves for was Operation Warp Speed. And Operation Warp Speed was the program that brought that vaccine to the market within 11 months, which was almost a miracle. Almost a miracle. I mean, the New York Times, I remember when Trump said we're going to have a vaccine in 10 months under this Operation Warp Speed program, I mean, the New York Times wrote a piece saying, there goes Donald Trump lying again. we're not going to have a vaccine until 2023. You can look this up. That's what the New York Times said. It's going to take at least 3 years to develop a vaccine to deal with COVID. The Operation Warp Speed program was a really interesting one, by the way. I was peripherally involved in it. Not, I'm not by no means an expert on healthcare. But what really Operation Warp Speed did was it basically pulled an end run around all of these regulations in terms of developing new drugs and vaccines, and basically said, we're going to go around all of these FDA requirements and so on, because we can't wait 3 years. People are dying. We need to get this thing done, in less than a year. And it was because of this incredible group effort where we got that thing done, and it saved millions of lives, millions and millions of lives around the world. Now, the vaccine wasn't so successful in dealing with the Omicron variant, but it's certainly effective in terms of, reducing the death rates from Delta, which was the really deadly variant of that virus. And so that was a huge, huge development. The other thing Trump did, because this is an important chapter of what happened to our country, and I want to make sure people understand what went right and what went wrong. I believe, and I think the evidence is crystal clear about this, although, there's still debate about it, but in my mind, it's fairly well settled that locking down the American economy was a catastrophic mistake. We should never have look, we did 14 days to, what was the original thing? 14 days to stop to flatten the curve, when we were dealing with something we didn't know about. But this was the first time in history where we dealt with a health crisis by shutting down healthy people and shutting down businesses. And I felt that was not just bad policy. I felt like it was unconstitutional power grab by the United States government to do that. And what we now know, and by the way, I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking here. We had a group together in the White House, and we came up with a strategy that was the strategy that should have been used and should be used anytime because we're probably going to see more variants of COVID. We'll probably see new viruses emerge. The strategy we should have used was protect the vulnerable. Protect the vulnerable. We knew from the very beginning of COVID who the vulnerable people were. Children and college students were not vulnerable unless you had other health issues like emphysema or heart issues or something like that. Children were not vulnerable. Shutting down the schools was a horrific mistake, and it did real damage to the educational development of our children. So that was a mistake. And the other thing was, we have good evidence because Trump allowed states to make their own decisions about how to deal with COVID. And what Trump did, I think, was say, we're going to let states decide. We're going to let Michigan decide, your Michigan governor and legislature decide how you're going to deal with this in Michigan. And Florida's going to make their decisions, and California's going to make their decisions. And that's perfectly consistent with our system of federalism in this country, which was ingenious. One of the reasons the United States is the wealthiest country in the world, there's many reasons, but I think the fact that we have a system of federalism where we basically, what are the 9th and 10th Amendments? Anybody know what the 9th and 10th Amendments are? Most people don't know. The 9th and 10th Amendments are my two favorite, other than the First Amendment. They say basically all powers not explicitly granted to the federal government reside with the states and the people. The states and the people. And the fact that we've allowed states, and that's what Jonathan's going to talk about, that we've allowed states to be essentially what Brandeis called laboratories of democracy is ingenious. Because guess what? States learn from each other. It's competition, and this competition is a healthy thing. And so some states got it very right. Florida got it right. Utah got it right. Iowa got it right. Nebraska got it right. Texas got it right. And the states that didn't get it right were New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois, and Michigan, not so much. So hopefully we've learned some of the lessons of this, that if we could have reduce significantly the economic damage. We didn't have to shut down our businesses if we simply said, senior citizens, we are going to keep you safe. Because this was a disease that killed older people. And again, there are always, outlier cases. But for the most part, an old person was 1,000 times more likely to die from COVID than a young person was. And yet we treated everyone the same. And so I think that was a tragic mistake, and hopefully we have learned the lesson from that. I'll make one other point, and then I'll turn it over to Jonathan. We now face a situation where the economy is not so good. I'm worried about the United States economy right now. I think we're in a very precarious situation with respect to some of the policy changes that were made when Biden came in. And I'm not here to attack President Biden, but I don't like the policies he's put in place. And I think that they've done severe damage. And I'll just give you a couple of statistics that might make you think about whether these policies are working. So the month that Donald Trump left office in January of 2021, the inflation rate in the United States was 1.8%. And by the way, the economy had already started to vastly improve in the last 6 months that Trump was president. We'd had 2 quarters of very strong economic growth because the lockdowns had basically ended. And so we had an economy that was really ready to surge, and yet we still had an inflation rate of only 1.8%. And so think about this. In 14 months, we've gone from a 1.8% inflation rate to a 8% inflation rate. And 8% inflation is a really, really bad number. We're all experiencing that firsthand right now. Whether you go to the gas pump, whether you go to the grocery store, whether you try to rent a car, try to buy a used car, everything is just more expensive. And by the way, inflation is just a tax, right? Inflation is just a tax on people. It's like think of an 8% inflation tax like an 8% sales tax. You have to pay 8% more for everything that you buy. And so it is also an extraordinarily regressive tax, right? Because inflation, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett don't care about, the price of gasoline. And they don't care if their utility bill goes up by another $100 a month. And they don't care if they have to pay, $6 for a gallon of milk. But if you're living on an income of less than $50,000, inflation is a killer. It's a killer for you. And so this is an extraordinarily regressive tax. And then the question is, why has it happened? I'll kind of end with this. Why are we experiencing this high inflation? And I think it's because of a couple of things that happened, which were major mistakes. And we can talk about this in the question and answer period. Number one was the massive increase in government spending that happened under Biden. And by the way, Trump was not a fiscal conservative. I mean, Trump liked to spend money too. So I'm going to say Trump deserves some of the blame here. But we had about $1.5 trillion that was still in the pipeline to be spent because we kept passing all these COVID relief bills, one after another, after another, after another. We spent $5 trillion, by the way, on COVID. Did you know that? $5 trillion. That's 5 with 12 zeros. Never before have we spent anything like that. That's more money than we spent on the entire World War II. So we spent a lot of money on COVID. And when Biden came in, we had $1.5 trillion already in the pipeline to be spent because it had already been approved by Congress. And the first thing Biden did was pass a $1.9 trillion additional spending bill, even though we had $1.5 trillion in the pipeline. And then 6 months later, they passed another $1.1 trillion spending bill. And thank God, we were able to stop something called the Build Back Better bill. That would have been, in my opinion, catastrophic, cataclysmic. That bill would have added $3 or $4 trillion more. If you think 8% inflation is bad, and it is, it's a really bad number. It's the worst number we had in 40 years. Can you imagine how bad the inflation would be if we had poured another $4 trillion on top of that? And thankfully, we were able to defeat that bill because of a Democrat, Joe Manchin, who's the man of the year, right? He was the one Democrat who would not vote for this bill, and they only had 50 votes in the Senate. So if one Democrat defected, they couldn't get that bill passed. So sometimes one man in Congress can save our country, and Manchin did. So all of that, what I'm saying is all of that government spending, when you flush all that money into the economy, what is inflation? You know this. You've all had economics. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. if you're going to flush that kind of money in the economy, it's as clear as the sun coming up in the east in the morning that you're going to have higher inflation. This isn't, as my friend would say, this isn't rocket surgery. This is pretty obvious that that's going to be the result of all of that spending. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The other thing that we did that I think was a major mistake, and we can talk about this because I feel passionately about this. I wrote a book on energy policy. The war against American energy is very dangerous. It is doing real damage to our national security, our economy. The fact that we are now having to import oil from Russia, it's immoral. It's immoral. When Trump left office, we were importing zero oil from the rest of the world. Zero. We were producing 11 million barrels a day. I think if Trump were still president, we'd be at 15 million barrels a day. We're down to 10 million barrels a day because of this war against American energy. And that, I think, has been extremely negative with respect to our economy, with respect to jobs, and with respect to our national security. And so those are the kinds of things that are going wrong. Now, I'll just end with simply saying this. We are going to get through this. We're going to get through this. That's the one great thing about America, is that we always endure. The American people have a fundamental wisdom about them. That's one of the great things about our country. And so we'll figure this out. And people are angry right now. People are very angry about what's happening to our country. You should be. I don't know if you're angry, but you should be, because we've made a lot of mistakes. But one of the things I've learned, over the 35 years I've been in politics, is Americans, when they see things going wrong, they want a correction. And we will correct course. And I don't know who the next president is going to be. I don't know who the Democratic nominee is going to be. I don't know who the Republican nominee is. Maybe it'll be Trump. Maybe it'll be somebody else. Who knows? But the cavalry is coming. Cavalry is coming. And this is the great thing about America. I honestly believe Reagan said it exactly right, that it was, I'm not an especially spiritual person, but Reagan said it very effectively, that it was divine providence that put America here as a beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. And I think that's still true today. Don't you? Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. And as I always like to say, greetings from the land of make-believe in Washington, D.C., where I come from, Steve comes from. And it is good to be back home. I grew up just a number of miles down the road here in the area. And anytime I get a chance to get outside of the land of make-believe, back into reality, back into mid-Michigan, it's a good day. So really appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be back at my alma mater here at Northwood. About 20 years ago, I was sitting in the same seats that you're sitting in today, and it is just such a pleasure to be back here knowing that Northwood is thriving under President McDonald's leadership, is staying true to its mission, and is really setting itself apart among institutions of higher learning, where things like the Northwood idea and just a belief in capitalism and free markets are so undervalued and underappreciated and really undertaught in many, many other cases. And so to be here is just such a pleasure, and to share a stage with my good friend and co-author Stephen Moore to talk about really America at a crossroads, theme of the Freedom Seminar, and challenges and opportunities. And I think Steve hit very well on many of the challenges, certainly that we have at the federal level, certainly you have with the broad national economy. You're living some of the challenges. In fact, as we were driving over here this evening with my good friend Jeremiah is in the audience, we were commenting to ourselves, when did we ever think that we would ever say that we were surprised and happy that gas prices were $3.69 a gallon here in Midland, Michigan? And that was a positive, right? I mean, how did we get here? And so what Steve just said about big government spending and socialism-based policies in Washington, thank goodness. And Steve, I think, deserves a lot of credit, because he won't give himself the credit, but I will. And that without this man right here, I think we would be on the hook for trillions and trillions of dollars and more spending in Washington, D.C. So thank you, Steve, for your leadership in stopping that. And one of the things is I've been honored to come back many times to speak here on campus, and every summer I host a gathering of state legislators from around the region to come here to the McNair Center to talk about free market ideas. I get to live the Northwood idea every day in what I do. And when Steve said that, you got to do what you love, that's exactly what I get to do, is I get to talk about free market policy, not necessarily always in Washington, D.C. either. But as I'm going to talk about as the focus of my brief remarks before we get to questions today is not the challenges that we know very well, but the opportunities for America, I think, start to getting back to our roots. And what does that mean? It means getting back to the idea of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. And my organization, ALEC, is a free market, nonpartisan organization that does embody the Northwood idea. Free markets, limited government, federalism. Those are our three guiding principles at ALEC. And we work with about 2,000 state legislators across the country, many here in Lansing, many across in all other state capitals, to talk about what is it that a free economy can mean for their state. And the idea, as Steve said, that states are and need to be, it's essential that states operate as laboratories of democracy for us to get back to the basics of the founders, because the good ideas will rise to the top, the bad ideas will fall to the floor, and we will all be better off when Washington pays attention to what's working and what's not. And so the book that Steve and I put together every year with Arthur Laffer, who is one of Ronald Reagan's economic advisors, if you've gotten into economics, you know the Laffer curve in economics. If you watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know the Laffer curve in economics. It's a concept, though, that we have all this great data, and every year we measure it across the states. And we've seen some really impressive movements now in the direction of free markets, and that is the opportunity. If we can capture why, let's say, states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and Arizona and Utah and states that embody the Northwood idea, embody free market policies, are the states that are actually the states growing today. They're attracting people, they're growing new jobs, they have the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Compare and contrast that group of states with the states that embody a very different outlook and ideology. New York, California, Illinois. I always almost halfway joke to when we're in Lansing, Illinois is our best economic development partner here in Michigan. They continue to send jobs and people to states like Michigan and states with lower taxes. This year, though, we've seen a historic amount of movement at the state level. And I've got a few slides I'll show you, and I'll try to read off some of the highlights because I know it may be a little bit small type in back. But right now, because of better or for worse, many of the dollars, that federal money that's been sent out to the states are in very sound financial footing. And now it's very clear that the states that are taking advantage of that, the states that are becoming more competitive, cutting taxes, making it easier to start a business and to be successful in business, are absolutely the states that are growing today. In fact, there's something, this is really interesting, Steve, in that in the grand totality of state income tax systems, for instance, and states have been at taxing income for 100 plus years now, there was a grand total of 4 states that ever went from being a progressive income tax, meaning that you have multiple tax brackets, and the more you earn, the higher success level you have. Not only the more you pay, but the higher rate that you pay. That's the progressive tax system, which penalizes work, savings, and investment, and penalizes success. The flat tax idea, which was Steve Forbes and Steve Moore's worked on this, was that you'd have a single rate, that you make more, you do pay more, but you don't pay a higher rate. And so in the grand totality of state tax policy systems over the last 100 years, we've seen only 4 states go from a progressive tax system to a flat tax. In the last month, in the last 4 weeks, we have seen 4 new states become flat tax states. These 4 right here. Arizona because of a court ruling. Georgia about 5 days ago when they adjourned their session for the year. I've been working on that in Atlanta for the last couple of weeks. Iowa under Governor Kim Reynolds, who gave the response to President Biden's State of the Union address a number of weeks ago. We worked on that effort. And we also, for the last couple of years, worked with Mississippi that about 4 days ago became a flat tax state, signed into law by the governor. So we're seeing states dramatically move in the direction of lower taxes and becoming more free market friendly. And starting out 2022, here are all the states that actually made more marginal rate reductions, not fully reforming their tax systems. But here is a list of just the states that cut personal income taxes. And of course, that's not just all of us who earn wage income, but that's the vast majority of small businesses who pay on the individual side of the income tax code. A huge number of states cutting personal income tax rates. And of course, one of the things that we always do in our research is look at the states. For instance, there's 9. I mentioned a few of them as being free market success stories across the country a minute ago, like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, but there's 9 that do not tax personal income altogether. Many very successful inbound migration, job creation engines really in those states. And then states with some of the highest taxes, a huge differential between income tax policy in some states versus others, getting back to this idea of needed competition across states. When it comes to business taxes, also a huge number of states reduced corporate income taxes over the last year as well, including one, and this is one I talked to Dr. Matchek about, and he was very pleasantly surprised to hear about this, but North Carolina last year, this is a bipartisan win for the state and for taxpayers by the Republican legislature, by a Democrat governor, signed into law to repeal its business tax altogether by the end of this decade. North Carolina is a state that's been a huge growth state and a state that's going to continue to be a growth state going forward. And then let me click through a couple of things here because, we rank the states, and if you hopefully grabbed a copy of one of the editions of our book that we sent out here as a gift to our friends at Northwood. But it's not just our theory and how we rank states and why we say some are competitive and some are not. The proof's in the pudding here, and this is where the rubber really hits the road, in that if you're a state that is doing things well, that's keeping tax costs down, that's becoming more free market and pro-business, you're going to be a state that's gaining population generally. When you're a state that doesn't get things right, you're going to lose population. It's very rare to see anomalies from there. Once in a while you did, and you still do occasionally. But look at and this is just 1 year's worth of data, by the way. So this is coming out of the pandemic, the most recent year of census data. Texas has gained more than 300,000 new residents from the other 49 states in 1 year alone. 300,000. If you're a fan, any University of Michigan football fans here? Any Michigan State? All right, now that's a dangerous question, although this is the spring and not the fall, so I may not getting something thrown on me today. But that being said, think about the big house. What is it, 113,000, give or take? Texas has gained nearly 3 big houses full of individuals that have gone from other states to Texas. And of course, one of the reasons, taking advantage of the pro-business climate, free markets, and no income tax. Florida, same thing, nearly 200,000 up. Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, other big in-migration states, all states that embrace lower taxes and free market ideas. And then you look at the other side of the equation. What do you recognize here if you read about tax rates and you read about competitiveness in the news? New York, California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Louisiana, states that are known for high degree of tax burdens, but also anti-business outlook overall, and a lot of government corruption issues generally, and cronyism, where instead of just keeping taxes low across the board like you would in a free market, is they have high tax rates on everybody and then pick special favorites based on who has the best lobbyists in those state capitals and get the tax rates down. And that's the definition of anti-free market policy, of course. And let me just say with this, here is how we rank the states. And so based on the idea of competitiveness and why some policies matter more than others and what it really means to be a competitive state. If we want to have these 50 laboratories of democracy, what we came up with 15 years ago, my first day on the job, I just told this guy, Steve Moore, and this guy, Art Laffer, two of the greatest economists in recent times, wanted to come up with this idea of ranking the states, to get down to this idea of laboratories of democracy, that states need to be innovators, that we don't believe in a big, powerful, central planned economy. We want distributed authority, and states need to operate. And how do we measure that? And so that's what we put together our Rich States, Poor States Index in our report. So this is our 2021 rankings. And by the way, in about a week, we'll be releasing the 2022 rankings. So stay posted, richstatespoorstates.org. We'll be unveiling the newest edition of this. But a few interesting stories to take away here from the map. We'll go through the top 10 and a few interesting stories and a few from the bottom 10. Utah has actually been #1 for all 15 editions, and there's a lot of free market success stories there in Utah. They've one of the states that created a flat tax about 15 years ago. They've addressed a major issue for states across the board, which is the unfunded public pension systems have trillions of dollars of unfunded liabilities. That, by the way, those are all tax increases waiting to happen on all of us if they're not careful. And in Q&A, potentially we can get into this a little bit, but I think it was referred to earlier. I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal today talking about some of the threats to pension systems and kind of a radical anti-energy agenda that's kind of getting into the pension debate. That's an important topic. But Utah has been a state that has transitioned to more of, you're familiar with the 401k aspect in the private sector. That's something that they, in many other states, trying to do the right thing, have transitioned to that positive government reform. Florida, a state without an income tax, done very well in our rankings. Oklahoma, Wyoming, and North Carolina round out the top 5. I would note in Michigan's neighborhood here in the Great Lakes region, Indiana's been a state that has moved up tremendously over the years. And in fact, probably 10 years ago, Steve, when Indiana was middle of the pack, and then we had Governor Mitch Daniels, Governor Mike Pence before he became vice president. Indiana made some substantive reforms that moved Indiana now up to perennially in the top 10 in our ranking. And then the bottom states, New York. There's a lot to be said there. And we just talked about the data. New York has lost 300,000 people nearly in the last year alone. And now it's an interesting dynamic to think about, though, by the way. For years, we've studied why people go from one state to another. Obviously, we know everybody, if you're here from Michigan, if you're a native, you know the snowbird concept. People leave the winters in Michigan. It was even a little chilly this morning, I will say, at 40 degrees in sleet almost this morning here in mid-Michigan. You know, but people don't just move for the weather. What's the #1 reason why people move from one state to another? Economic opportunity. When the survey data is done by census and others, that's why people go from one state to another. It's economic opportunity. And New York, of course, is losing. But one thing that's really interesting to note is we've all followed this dynamic. You probably have family members. You've seen it yourselves. What do employers now need to It's just the fact that it's just 1 year's worth of data that 300,000 people have left California, 300,000 people have left New York. It's because of the natural ideas of jobs aren't being created there, taxes are too high, but it's also the fact that you can work for some of the Wall Street firms and not pay $5,000 a month in rent and live in Manhattan. You can go buy a place and buy it maybe free and clear in a short period of time and take a 10-year mortgage and actually buy a place in a state and still have the exact same job that you had, work with the same coworkers, and not lose a beat when you're at it. Maybe go into the office once or twice a month. That new dynamic may not be a temporary dynamic. Let's think about that, right? I mean, and that's why it's so important for states to get things right going forward. So if we didn't have a chance to talk about all your states, if you're from other states, I know you're probably, many of you, concerned about Michigan clearly here, and we could talk about that in the Q&A, but if you'd like to scan the QR code here, you can download your specific state data if you put in the postal abbreviation, or you can text message here to get your state ranking of states that you're interested in there. But let me just end with this, and we'll open it up to questions. I don't know if Dr. Matchik, if you'd like to come up to kick that off. We went through a lot of numbers here in a fairly short amount of time, but I think what the important piece is freedom and free market ideas are absolutely winning when they're put up in competition with big government ideas that other states have. And that's the beauty of the American experiment, right? The idea that these states are laboratories of democracy. They must compete against each other. And when free market ideas directly compete with big government ideas on an equal playing field, based on the results that we're seeing across the 50 states as laboratories of democracy, we know the freedom agenda wins. We know the Northwood idea comes out on top because freedom always wins. That's the experiment of the American story, and that's what Washington needs to take a page from once in a while. That's something that is so foreign to a concept in Washington that, if anything, in the research that we've done now for 15 years in rich states, poor states, I think that's what's forgotten a lot of times in the debate, but it's what absolutely is our opportunity going forward. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. Also, we have people joining us online tonight, and they might have questions. I wonder if I can get those questions on the monitor here, and we can turn this screen off. So, is there anybody that would like to start us off with the first question tonight? I did have a question from somebody online tonight who obviously knows a little bit of your background, Mr. Moore, and that is, you were a student of Julian Simons, and we had a question from Tim Nash who wonders if you have any memories you could share with us about.
Sure. Wow, boy, that's one of my favorite. Is this on, by the way? Can you hear me? You can hear me okay? That's like my favorite question because, everybody, if you're lucky in life, you'll have good mentors. And I've been really lucky in having really great mentors, people like Julian Simon and Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow and people like that. And so, life is also, one of the things you kind of learn about life is, by the way, can I get some water? Can somebody get me just a glass of water or something? Thank you. You kind of learn that life can be a crapshoot, and I met Julian Simon. How many of you in this room even have heard of Julian Simon? 5 or 6. So Julian Simon was a brilliant, brilliant economist who took on the doomsday, you people, thank you so much, the doomsday machine back in the 1970s and 1980s. It was all about the world is coming to an end. It was basically the world is overpopulated, and we're breeding like Norwegian mice, and we're gonna be crowded, so crowded on the earth that we'll be standing elbow to elbow. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. This is what people were talking about. This was the kind of Malthusian idea that we just keep breeding and breeding and breeding and breeding and breeding until we have this kind of Malthusian existence of, basically, living in squalor. And so the idea was that we were going to run out of oil, we were going to run out of gas, we were going to run out of food, we were going to run out of farmland, we were going to run out of clean air, every water, we were going to run out of water. And that's what everybody believed. That was the kind of conventional wisdom of the time. And it was something that was, I love when people talk about the scientific consensus, because back then, this truly was the scientific consensus, that we were facing this Malthusian nightmare of scarcity. And Julian Simon was a professor at Illinois, where I went, the University of Illinois, who I met by just chance. And it was one of these things, I don't know if you ever have had this experience yourself, where you get exposed to an idea and you just have an epiphany. How many of you have sort of had that experience where you're like, oh my God? And it's an incredible thing when that happens. And I was like, everything they've been teaching me since I was in the 3rd grade is wrong about the environment. And Julian Simon's philosophy and theory was that the name of his very famous book, which is actually worth reading, it was written 40 years ago, but it's worth reading. The name of the book was called The Ultimate Resource. The Ultimate Resource. Now, can anybody in this room tell me what the ultimate resource is on the planet Earth? What is the most important resource? You can't answer because I know you know. Okay, sir, what is it?
No, he's a professor.
No, it has to be one of the students. What do you think is the most important resource we have? Yes, sir. Is it time? Time? Yep. Time is scarce. But no, that's not what I was looking for. Yeah.
I was going to say.
Yes, innovation, the human mind. The most important on this resource on this planet is that thing between your 2 ears, the human mind. That's what creates all of the things that we have. And Julian Simon's great insight was that the human mind, this innovation process that you're talking about, always outpaces the depletion of the resource of the planet. And what's really interesting, because this is an economic seminar, how would you prove that something is getting more scarce or more abundant over time? If you wanted to look at over like 200 years, let me ask this differently. If something is getting scarcer and scarcer over time, what happens to its price? Goes up, right? That's the very definition of scarcity, right? If something is scarce, the price goes up. If something becomes more and more abundant over time, then what happens to its price? It goes down. And what Julian Simon did is starting to look at long periods of time, like 500 years. What's happened to the price of corn? What's happened to the price of copper? What's happened to wheat, oil? And what he found was, contrary to what everybody believed, over time, actually, the price of these natural resources continue to go down. Now, that doesn't mean they don't jump up. And the reason everybody thought we were running out of things in the 1970s is because, guess what? In the 70s, the prices did rise. And so people thought, oh my, they're going to rise like this, but actually they continue to fall. And incidentally, this is very relevant. I know I'm going off on this, but this is really important. The problem with all this climate change stuff, I mean, I'm not here to debate the science about climate change. It's not something that keeps me up at night, but, some people worry about climate change, other people don't. But here is the fundamental flaw of all of these models. They're looking at, let's say, 40 or 50 years worth of data, right, about what's happened to the planet, the temperature's planet over the last 50 years. Folks, that's the blink of an eye. 50 years is nothing. It's nothing. That tells you nothing. This planet is how many millions of years old? So to say, well, they're looking at these tiny, tiny samples and saying, oh, the line is like this. It's going to go up or down or whatever. That's flawed. That's not science. That's not science. The planet's temperature over the last million years has gone like this, right? And so, no, look, I'm not saying that, the carbon emissions may not be, I don't know. I'm not a climatologist, but what I'm telling you is that these models can be very flawed. And we know that because the models that they used in the 70s was flawed. And so we will overcome this. I'm going to make one other point about climate change. If we're going to solve the problem of a warming planet, if indeed it is warming, the way we're going to overcome this problem is how? Through economic growth and technology. Technology is the solution, not telling everybody, oh, God, you have to stop driving cars. You can't use an air conditioner in your house anymore. That's ridiculous. We will find new ways to deal with this. There was an article in National Geographic that I was reading the other day because my son gets National Geographic, and they found this new technology where they can emit certain kind of chemicals into clouds, and they can make it rain. That's kind of cool, isn't it? So if we have droughts, we can figure out these technologies that can make it rain, and that's what Julian Simon's theory was, and it's really because we should be optimists. Life on Earth is getting better. There is no time in the history of this planet that you would rather be alive than today. No way. There's no previous time. Well, it might have been cool to live in 1776, maybe with Ben Franklin and, these incredible great minds like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. But the life on Earth is so much better today than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. And we are doubly blessed because not only are we living at the best time ever to live, we're also living in the best country ever to live. And that is we've won the lottery of life. We really have.
Here's another question. This one's directed towards you, Jonathan. You gave a lot of data today, but it seems to focus on things like employment and income. And we have a member of our online audience who says, but is there evidence to suggest that states with lower tax rates and pro-business policy experience healthier environment, healthier people, or other non-economic measurements?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Steve's actually probably looked at some of the research on this as it relates to the environment. But I think there's a strong correlation between states that are freer and have better business environments and lower taxes and actually develop more energy in many of those states and better environmental outcomes in those states, let's say. So you look at pollution levels, or you look at other items. It's correlated in many cases, I understand, heavily. So lower pollution after you explore more. This is somewhat paradoxically, but also lower taxes and more free economies. But another way to look at it too, we were actually talking about this at our dinner table tonight during our robust discussion there, was, not just betterment of, let's say, job creation or income growth, but these are very important things for well-being overall. Another overlooked element of this is states that have lower taxes and a more pro-business, free market environment have higher levels and more growth of charitable giving. So when people have more, they give more to charity. And so let's say, for instance, when somebody, a millionaire, let's say, leaves New Jersey or New York, some of the most inhospitable states for millionaires to live, and goes to Florida or Texas, automatically stays with there. They don't just earn their income there, and they do pay their taxes into, let's say, sales taxes and property taxes into Texas and Florida. Guess what? They take their charitable donations and they contribute to the churches and synagogues, let's say, in Florida, Texas, versus those in giving up financial reasons. So there's much more in terms of the data that shows virtues of being a good state when it comes to free market policy, lower taxes, pro-business environment, other than the top line data, although those things are very important. But Steve, I know you've studied this on the energy piece as well.
You're exactly right, Jonathan, and I'll give you a good example. So of the students of the room, not the professors, what country over the last 6 years has reduced its carbon emissions more than any other country? Anybody want to guess?
Sweden.
What?
Sweden.
No. Yes.
Germany.
No.
U.S.
I'm going to keep going until somebody gets this right.
China.
What?
China.
Canada?
Somebody said it.
China.
I'm having a little.
You said China.
China. Did you say China? You get out of this room. China is by a mile the biggest polluter. I mean, China is they're by far the biggest polluter. But what country has reduced? The fact that you don't know tells us a lot about what the media is telling us. Because, all right, who is it?
United States.
Which country?
United States.
Yes, the United States.
At least 3 people.
Oh, okay, sorry. Raise your hand if you got that right. Okay, sorry.
Right.
I don't hear very well. Congratulations. But you're exactly right. And by the way, the fact that the other 60 or 70 of you in this room didn't know that, it shows you that the media never reports that, right? The media doesn't go out and say, oh, the United States. Most people actually think the United States is one of the biggest, increase in pollution. So we were getting richer and we're polluting less. Environmental protection is the ultimate superior good. Do you all know what a superior good is? It's something that you want more of when you get rich, right? So the richer we get, the cleaner we want our air to be, and the cleaner we want our water to be. And so the solution to a lot of environmental problems is keep getting richer and richer and richer. We'll spend more and more money cleaning up our environment. But, China by far is the single biggest polluter by far. Even if the United States didn't even exist as a country, the impact on global emissions would be de minimis because of China, India, all of these other countries that are polluting like crazy. So that's something that's frustrating me, that people don't realize those facts, and they are. And by the way, I'll ask one other bonus question. It's a two-word answer. How is it that the United States is polluting so much less today than we were 5 and 6 years ago? It's something that we're using more of, an energy source. Anybody know what that is? What? Who said that? Natural gas. Yeah. It turns out natural gas is a wonder fuel. It's the answer to all our problems, right? Natural gas is cheap, it's abundant, it's made in America, it's reliable, and it's clean burning. It's everything that you want in a fuel, and yet the Greens are against natural gas. Can you explain that one?
Well, and actually, that's a really big topic in the cities in many cases right now, in kind of the big government centrally planned version of states out there that we talked about. In many of those cities, in new constructions, in fact, they're banning natural gas new construction. So to get to the point of what's actually been causing such of this reduction of pollution in many cases in the United States, that's actually a target of the kind of anti-business movement in many of the blue cities across the country right now.
Okay, getting on to another topic. It wasn't really addressed in your talk, but I happen to know we have somebody listening in from Texas. They're and so some of the things that you mentioned, Jonathan, triggered their question, I think. Explain the economics of migration in terms of demand and supply of labor, and the economics of U.S. and Mexico. There's some elements to this question, more detailed, but essentially the question is about labor, Mexico, the United States, and the role of immigration.
Well, if you want to take the immigration piece, we were talking about that a little bit over dinner, and we can talk a little bit more about interstate migration from there.
Okay, well, I'll just quickly look, I'm very pro-immigration. I'm very pro-immigration. I think immigrants are a very important part of the formula of American success. I mean, we truly get the best and brightest and hardest working people from the rest of the world to come here. How many of you in this room were born in another country? Any? Yeah. So, I mean, it's a blessing. It's like, an NBA, I always say it's like an NBA basketball team. What if one team got all the first round picks every year? Nobody could possibly compete with that team, right? That's America. We can take the best and the brightest and the smartest and the hardest working people. They don't want to go to Canada. They don't want to go to China. They don't want to go to Germany. They don't want to go to Israel. They want to come here. And my feeling is people want to come here and contribute and work. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have 10 million job openings in this country today. Did you know that? 10 million job openings. Guess who could fill those jobs? Hardworking immigrants. Now, I don't think immigrants should come into this country and get, welfare benefits. I want them to come because they want to seek freedom and benefits. Now, some of you may disagree with me on this. Some of you may not, want more immigrants. But I think it's just so clear. Immigrants are incredibly entrepreneurial. They have a much higher propensity to start businesses than American-born people. They are, they're doing so much of the service work and the construction work and the manufacturing work. I was in a plant not long ago outside of Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was a factory with about 500 workers, and I go in there, and there's like 400 of them are Hispanics, that have come from all over the Central America, and they're the hardest working people. It's incredible. So I love that about America, and I never want to see us close our doors. It's also, I really believe it's a rejuvenation, and it's one of the reasons I've always asked, the most important issue for our country right now is not climate change. It is not climate change. I'm sick of people talking about that. The most important question for your generation is very simple. Will it be the United States or China as the world economic superpower over the next 50 years? That is the issue of our time, okay? And one of the reasons people always ask me, do you think China is going to overtake the United States? And I always say no. You know why? Because our Chinese are smarter than their Chinese. And I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's true. We are getting some of their best, smartest people. We get the smartest people from all over. So I love it. And, Texas is a dynamic state that has a lot of immigrants from, and by the way, you don't have the, in Texas, I don't know if there's anybody here from Texas, I don't know, maybe one or two, but, they don't have the kind of ethnic tensions that other places do, because it's a state that really integrates immigrants very well into their culture. But what are your thoughts about this?
Well, it's a good question on labor markets. I was actually just giving a hotel and hospitality industry conference down in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, where this was one of the biggest issues that's being grappled with right now is how to get people back to the workforce. How do we make sure, in fact, just talking to some of the hotel owners here in town, having a horrible time trying to find work. And, one of the biggest issues, into some of the interstate migration discussion that we had earlier, why people take the state. But one of the biggest issues is this thing that, Steve, you and I talk about with Arthur all the time, is we have horrible incentive in place, which is we're paying people not to work, and then we're taxing people who work. Folks, it's not rocket surgery, as Steve said earlier. This is basic economics. Tax them. Not be surprised when we're having a shortage, especially when we have the bonus federal unemployment benefits that were going out around COVID. Steve and I talked ad nauseum about that, how horrible it was. Some of the governors, really, I think, stepped out and took a lot of political heat for this, but did the right thing and ended those bonus payments early to make sure that there was some sort of equalization in the labor market. But one of the things that, let's say, the free market states, that group of states like Texas and Florida that we talked about, do well is since they don't tax income at that state level, is they lessen the price working in the workforce. And of course, they don't have as rich of some of the benefits for staying home and not working in some of the bigger government states. And so that's, I think, one of the interesting dynamics of why you've seen so much labor market growth in the states, let's say, that have lower taxes and have more free market economies.
Okay, we have a question in the back of the room here.
So you might both be able to answer this, but this might be more towards Jonathan for anything you've heard in the American Legislative Council. One issue I'm curious what your thoughts are. So you give a little bit of a quote. Oh, sure, I had it up. Okay, I'm going to paraphrase. I have to put it up on my phone refresh. It's from Ed Glazier's Triumph of the City. He says something like, the progressive cities on the East and West Coast have always professed a desire to have affordable housing, and they've never done anything for it. It's Texas, that has no commitment to affordable housing, builds more affordable housing than anywhere else in the country. It says, ultimately what we need is to unleash the developers. And so one thing I think has been happening over decades is we've had things like restrictive single-family housing zoning, minimum setbacks, minimum lot sizes, difficulty getting a building permit in general, but especially if you want to build like a multi-income, multi-unit dwelling. And then we've had cases like where people wanted to allow multi-unit dwellings, and people said, "Oh, they're trying to end the suburbs," as if the government were going to come in and bulldoze people's houses to build apartments, and not just telling developers, "You're now allowed to build apartments if you want to." So I think there's been battles between local governments and state governments. So I'm curious you might disagree with some of what I've said. So I'm curious what your thought is on that whole issue. Because I think a lot of young people are wondering, am I going to be able to find a place to live? And it also affects if people can't afford where to live, which state are they going to move to where they can?
Yeah. Great questions there. There's a lot to unpack. I think one of the overall takeaways, though, from the premise is, why is it that these, in a way, centrally planned cities can't get it right? It's because they're centrally planned, right? They don't let the free market make these the price signals work and the free market work, where Texas doesn't have a government bureaucracy and an agency head that's looking at affordable housing, let's say, like some of the cities in Portland, in Seattle, and some of the coastal cities that you talk about. But guess what? When you let the market work, it works. And when you centrally plan, many times you have all these unintended consequences. And of course, you mentioned some of the zoning issues that are clear issues. And I think we're seeing debates around that in state capitals, red states and blue states alike, and kind of revisiting that to make housing more affordable. And that's, I think, a good free market thing to discuss across the board. But when you see just the anti-business, high-tax framework, it's been doubling down on that in cities, and then you combine that with the violence that we've seen in some of the cities like Seattle and Portland, and really the movement to defund the police, let's say, in those cities. It's not a surprise that those cities in many cases are not doing well whatsoever, even if they've spent millions of dollars on some of these programs.
Well, we actually have time perhaps for one more question. So if you've been waiting to ask your question, now is the time. Yes, Andrew.
So in light of the conflict we have in Europe right now, and we've been seeing countries like China and Russia and Iran trade with Chinese yuan, do you have any concern that we could lose world reserve currency, or at least lose part of it? And what impacts would that have on our economy?
Oh, currency status. But that's a tough question. Not now. I mean, look, it's very simple. I mean, the dollar is still the world currency, and it will be, for the foreseeable future. And the reason for that is, and I've said this 1,000 times, it's because we're the least rotten apple in the cart, right? What other currency are you going to invest in? Rubles? You're going to invest in euros? You're going to invest in yuan? No. I mean, for all the problems the United States has that we've talked about tonight, we're still, the beacon of freedom. We still have the most free enterprise-based system. We still have the most dynamic economy. So no, I don't think we will lose our world reserve currency, but we're playing with fire. We're playing with fire. When you have inflation like you have right now, what is inflation? It's just a way to devalue your currency. That's what inflation is. It's devaluation. And somebody show me where, any time in the history of the world, I know we have some economic historians in this room, when has that story of devaluing a currency ever had a happy ending? Ever. It didn't work in Uruguay. It didn't happen in Russia. It didn't work in Argentina, Venezuela, Bolivia. All these countries, go through, a huge economic retrenchment when they have high inflation and a devaluation of their currency. Now, the other thing to think about that's just kind of interesting about this whole debate about, the supremacy of the dollar is that actually the thing that you all should be thinking about is there is a new phenomenon out there that is a real challenge to the dollar. And what is that? Bitcoin, cryptos, right? Now, these are new on the horizon. I don't know where they're headed. Some people made a ton of money on cryptos. But one thing I like about cryptos, and I don't even completely understand them, is that they are not run by government. They are private currencies. And I love that. Because it's freaking out the central bankers around the world. The Fed, the SEC, the Euros, the Euro bankers, they all want to regulate these cryptos. Why? Why do they want to do that? Because they're afraid that they're going to make the other central bankers kind of impotent, And so I think the fact that you have this private competition for currencies is a very positive development. A really positive development because it's going to discipline these countries. And so I think that's a really very positive thing. But look, the United States is still the land of the free, and we're going to get it right. We're going to get it right. We have a president right now who doesn't really understand economics very well, but we always correct. We always have for the last 250 years. We correct when things get off course. Americans are very practical. We're not an especially ideological people, but we're very practical people. And when things are going wrong, people demand change. And so, look, I'm bullish on America. I really am. I think the future that you're looking at is going to be spectacular, really spectacular. I mean, this is just the beginning of the digital age. It's just that, when I was in college, I'll never forget 1982, that was like for the first time there were personal computers. I'll never forget that. All of a sudden there's a personal computer. Remember that? Wow, this is so cool. And, now it's just the digital age is so incredible. It's like the industrial age, but like 10 times faster in terms of the change that it's bringing. And I find it to be incredibly exciting. I mean, in the next 50 years, we're going to see cures for cancer, for heart disease, for multiple sclerosis, for AIDS, for the way we're developing and advancing is so awesome. And one thing I know we're running out of time, but I want to make this point. I'll tell you something that really worries me, and this is something that's coming from my friends on the right, not on the left. And some of you in this room, because this is a fairly conservative group, may not agree with me on this, but I'm really dismayed by all of these attacks on the right against our technology companies. Now, do I like the fact that our technology companies are biased against conservatives? No, I don't like that. But my God, we have 5 companies in America right now that are worth $6 trillion. Who owns those companies? Who owns them? We all do. Your pension funds are in these, blah, blah, blah. Everybody owns these companies. It's an awesome thing that the leading technology companies in the world are virtually all American companies. Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, on and on down the line. Twitter. It's an awesome thing. And these are private companies. They should be able to do what they want, in my opinion. Now, I know this is a controversial, I'm throwing out some controversial ideas here, but I don't want the government regulating high tech. I want to see competition. I want to see if somebody, builds a better product, builds a better mousetrap, as these companies have, and they make, billions and billions and trillions of dollars, God love them. Nobody puts a gun to your head and says you have to use Google. Nobody puts a gun to your head and says you have to have a Facebook account, right? I mean, I'm sick and tired of these companies being called monopolies. The thing that's so interesting about a dynamic free market economy is one day's monopoly is tomorrow's failed company. I mean, already Facebook, just in the last 4 months, Facebook lost $400 billion. The market is disciplining them. We don't need politicians to intervene in these markets. Let's have economic freedom, and let's have the best man win, and let's not tear down our American companies, because the Chinese do want to take over our technological prowess, and I want to see America number one both in technology and in energy. Those are two of the most important industries, technological companies, and whoever has the geopolitical importance of the energy industry. We've known this for the last 60 years. It's critical. It's critical that we reestablish American dominance in energy, and we don't have it today. We're surrendering it. And I guarantee you that we're not going to be able to power a $23 trillion industrial economy that produces steel and manufactured products and construction and airplanes and cars and the cloud and all this stuff. We're never going to be able to power a $23 trillion economy with windmills. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We should use all of the energy we have, whether it's wind, solar, oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, use it all. Use it all, and let's become dominant in energy, because no country is more richly endowed with energy than the United States of America, and no country is more richly endowed with brain power and entrepreneurial spirit. I see it in this room than this great country. And I'm just going to conclude by saying I am so impressed by this program you have. I mean, it is. I wish every major university. This is unique. This is unique. I speak on college campuses all the way from Stanford to Harvard, and they don't have programs like this. They spend all their time denigrating the free enterprise system. So congratulations, Northwood. What a great program. And thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you. And on behalf of the university, I want to thank you both for your appearance here tonight, and I want to thank you all for your participation. And don't forget, we're going to be right back here tomorrow with a full day of programming, beginning with one of my all-time favorite topics by Art Carden, who's joining us in the room here tonight. He's going to be our speaker tomorrow, and he's going to talk about his book about the bourgeois deal. So if you want to find out more about that, come here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and stay here for the rest of the programming, and have a good night. Thank you.